Yeah, jump in and get started. So today's demo is going to be a little bit technical, but hopefully even for the non-technical people in this call, they can kind of get a better sense of some use cases that have kind of recently been opened up by OpenAI. Basically, what I'm going to cover today is just a summary of what they released at their last dev day and dive into some what I think are some super interesting use cases and how we might start applying these things in the future in our organizations and just what it really enables. So the goal is this will be a little bit technical, but it'll also kind of just be like a quick summary of different things you can now do with AI and how we can build faster and with less effort, build really cool systems. So yeah. Yeah, there's three things that I do want to try to get through. It's a lot, so I'm going to go really fast. This might be a good one to go back and watch. But I want to get through the GPT-Vision, which is a new capability, a multimodal capability, or multi-model capability, where you can now upload images. And if you've been using ChatGPT Plus, you've probably played around with this a little bit, but I've got some interesting use cases for that. Then I'd like to dive into the assistance API and really what that means for building agents, building ChatGPT-like experiences very quickly and very powerfully. And then we'll talk about one of the features of that, which is the code interpreter, which is a crazy feature that really allows you to do some cool stuff. So yeah, I'm going to jump right in with the first use case. So we're looking at a prompt. This is just in one of our little programs that we use for observability and prompt management. But basically what we've done here is we've created a prompt where if you're familiar with the chat interface in the past, you would send a series of messages to like system, user, and then the assistant would respond. But what you can do now is you can attach images in these prompts. So what we basically have is a prompt where we're telling the agent or the model that its job is to explain images for individuals with vision impairment, provide as much detail as possible. And I've loaded up a XKCD comic that's pretty significant complexity here. So let's just see how it does on it. This does take a little bit of time, but it is honestly for the type of processing that it's doing, it's pretty impressive. Should have spun this one's rambling. Cool. So we see that it's come back with a lot of detail about the image. And this is pretty incredible if you think about like what it's really doing, because not only is it understanding the text on the images and the different aspects of the images, but it's also able to kind of reason about what the image is and why, it's a satirical take on airplane seating charts and all that. So it's really able to, it goes beyond kind of, I think, classic like OCR style technologies that are just about extracting text. And it really has some form of spatial awareness, some form of kind of abstract concepts. And even though this is a comic, it recognizes that it's an airplane and all that. And it's really quite incredible. Another use case, like the first thing I thought of was, oh, maybe I can start using this to process all of my invoices that I get and, extract information from them, track receipts, track how much I'm spending. So, like here's a sample invoice that I pulled off the internet. And there's quite a lot of detail here. And, this is just an unstructured images. There's tables and stuff, but it's really able to extract all the key information out of it and understand, what the syntax of a table is and what it means to be in the same row on the table and, how to line up the headings and all that. So it's really quite incredible if you think about how far this has come. And I feel like this feature has kind of just like slid under the radar to a certain degree.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so taking a step further, like we can include more than one image and the capabilities of this, it doesn't support JSON mode yet, or like the ability to provide like a JSON schema and extract data, but you can kind of fall back on what we were doing before GPT-4 in JSON mode, which is just passing a data structure that we want it to mimic. And what I've done in this, I've uploaded 2 of my invoices for my gas bill, which is way too expensive. Don't pay attention to that. And they're like different invoices. They're a couple months apart, and they change their invoice structure. And I've asked it basically, I want you to compare the unit price increases across these 2 invoices and tell me how my bill has changed over time. Because gas prices fluctuate. And I've tested this quite a bit. I would say the accuracy is not 100%, but it's very good. Definitely, everything seems to be. If the number off, it's normally when it's not extracting the data from the invoice, but if you ask it to do like math or something like that, of course, these models aren't great at doing that type of analytical reasoning yet, although they seem to be getting better very quickly. But in terms of just like raw extraction, it does a really good job, and you can see it's kind of pulled out all of the different prices between the 2 invoices and calculated a percent change, which I think that's accurate. I don't know. We're not going to sit here and figure it out, but yeah, that is GPT-Vision in like 5 minutes. Any questions?
Was there any, other than what you just showed us, was there any other, long duration setup to get to this place?
No, this is, okay. Let me go back to I'm in the playground. This is the prompt. So this is exactly what we're sending to OpenAI. It's just you pass the model, which is GPT-Vision preview. This is a preview feature right now, and then your standard prompt parameters like tokens. And then, yeah, this is what, if you've used the chat API, this is what it typically looks like. You pass a list of messages and you have like the role and the content. And basically now the content used to be just a string, but now it kind of supports this array of content. So you can still pass text in, but you can also pass an array of images. So that's really it.
I'll just make up a business, but if I'm a financial advisor and I have clients who regularly walk in with piles of statements for me to use, and I want to render them and store them electronically, like this is a perfect use case for this preview, right?
Definitely a perfect use case for this technology. Obviously, the regulatory requirements around sending clients images up, like still a gray area that I think a lot of businesses are struggling to kind of decide where they fall. I think especially with like so many businesses are storing their data on Azure anyways, like, is it really that different to send it up to Azure for this type of stateless inference? I don't think it's any different. I think it's just a lot of businesses aren't comfortable with it yet, but that's going to change as these use cases become more compelling. And I think OpenAI becomes more friendly, like business friendly. When they first started releasing these APIs, they weren't very business friendly. Like they said, they would train on your data. And like since then, they've realized that's not going to fly. And all of that is like, they've really been shifting towards more enterprise offerings, I think. So we'll continue to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So Charlie, does this kill OCR? Does this kill all the AI that we've had where you have to guide it and say, look at this table, here's the table layout, try it, and that fails? This feels so easy.
Yeah, there's certainly OCR systems out there that are probably more accurate for scan and more performant for scanning and cost effective for scanning like a whole PDF of text. But yeah, for like these use cases, it does feel like, those OCR platforms that were charging you $100,000 a year or whatever to use it, like those seem like they're probably panicking a little bit. I would.
But I mean, doesn't it take it to the next step here, right? Because it's not only recognizing the data, but you then have the ability to take that data and maybe, store it in a database in singular field format, right? Where the OCRs typically.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to combine its ability, you can combine it with summarization and other generative tasks and do things that you could never do with an OCR. Like, I mean, for example, generating JSON data, like in one shot, like this is 0 shot, like no training involved in this process. You just tell it what you want, provide the information, you get something quite impressive out. So yeah, I think especially as this continues to get better, which it's going to only get better from here, you know? So yeah, it's quite good. Okay, I am going to move on because I do want to get to the assistant stuff because I think it's equally exciting. OpenAI released assistants, and basically you can kind of think of this as what they're using to power ChatGPT behind the scenes, or like an API to power your own custom ChatGPTs. This isn't the GPT's product that they talked about. That's very different and honestly not that exciting in my opinion. This is an API to be able to call into ChatGPT to basically build an assistant or an agent. So like this is something that you can ask it, you can provide it with tools and documents that it learns about or it embeds, and it can then execute those tools in a way that allows it to do really interesting things. So this is what it looks like to create an assistant. You basically give it a name, some kind of high-level instructions, and then you can provide it with some functions that it can call into. So these are points in which you integrate your software into this agent. So like and these are these are basically actions that it can take against your system. So we've got this schedule bot 3000, and really this could be like a general HR bot, but it has the ability to kind of see the employee directory, to schedule a meeting and get employee availability. So, you know, all you're really doing is just defining the structure of what data you expect. This is a function that doesn't have any parameters, whereas something like schedule a meeting, this isn't a great way to view this, is a function that's going to have a title, a start date, a duration, agenda, participants. So that's pretty much it. You can enable the code interpreter, which hopefully I'll have time to show because that's incredibly powerful. And then you can turn on retrieval. So this is RAG, or retrieval augmentation generation, built into OpenAI. And basically any file that you add here, it will embed the content in it. And then that becomes information that's accessible automatically to the agent. So I've uploaded our AI policy. If you asked it a question about AI, or like, am I allowed to use AI at work, it would look at that document and return an answer. So right off the bat, you could create a bot that has your whole like employee handbook or any information, and it would be able to answer questions about that. So I'm going to show what this looks like in the playground. So if I just said I need to talk to someone in engineering, and then I click add and run. So you can basically, what's really nice about this is it's managing the state really quick. If we look at what it would take to build this in the past, you would have, you know, the interface with the chat support, which is kind of what I just showed, an agent loop, which is kind of running multiple inferences behind the scenes, and then the tools that you provide that agent. And then you have to track the messages and the thread or the chat that's happening. You have to track the messages within that thread. Then you have to track your documents that you use for RAG, or kind of the knowledge base component. And then you also have to track, if you're going to support long conversations, you have to track memories or past conversations and figure out how to bring those back as needed so that you can keep the context short. With the Assistants API, you basically get all of that piece managed by OpenAI, and all you're doing is providing the chat interface and the tools to execute it. So going back to this, basically what's happened is I've asked to talk to somebody in engineering. The agent returned, okay, show me the employee directory. And this would be a function call into our system. So if I just mimic that, I'll come over to this just that I've created, and I'll just grab kind of the employee directory, and you can see it's just got name, email, department, and so on. If I come back over here, I would just submit this back to it, and you can see it's going to basically look at the result that it's gotten back from this call into our system, and generate its next response based on that. So, basically what it's done is it's found all the people in that directory that were in the engineering department, and it's returned to them to me, and it's asking me, who do I want to meet with? And I could say, I want to meet with Mark and Omar. Okay, so now it's come back and it says, okay, you want to meet with Mark and Omar. I need to get the availability of each of those employees. So you can see it's passed employee ID 1004 and employee ID 1006. So if I came back over, this is again where it would be up to our system to respond. Again, I'll just kind of drop into these.
So Charlie, what's the glue that actually would make it make the call to the other system? Is that something in the function definition?
What we're looking at right now would be, you would build an app that basically just handles the chat. So accepting messages from the user and displaying messages back to the, displaying messages back to the user, just responses back to the user. And then you need to handle basically these calls. So there's a runtime loop that runs, and you can see it over here. Basically, the agent, you submit an input to it, or you add and run. And when that happens, it goes off and it might come back and say, okay, I need you to provide these tool calls back to me. Because we would get an array back that says, get employee availability, and it would have this data in it. So it's a really simple loop. I mean, you can implement it in less than 100 lines of code. And basically all that you're doing is sending the user messages up. And then whenever it comes back with a status that's saying you need to run a function, you're just switching on that, getting whatever function it's asked for and executing it and just returning the data to it.
So the data could come from any kind of call, right? It could be an SQL, it could be an API call, it could be whatever. Run a Python script if you want to, but you handle that as middleware essentially. And
basically it's middleware where you're just using this API to communicate everything. And if we go back to this diagram, you can see we're invoking the agent, and then it's almost like OpenAI is telling us that it needs data whenever it runs one of these tools. So we're responsible for providing the data for those tool calls, and everything else is basically, it's the part that I'm doing manually by copying the data back and forth.
Gotcha. Yep.
So yeah, you can see I provided the availability for both, and it says, based on those times, this seems like a great time to meet. And I could say, that sounds great. And it's asked for an agenda. Discuss Q4 or something like that. I'll add that, and then it will, it's gonna go and call the schedule meeting. Yeah, so that's basically it. And then this is where, at this point, this is where you would have a little integration that says, oh, I've received the schedule meeting request, go and make an API call to Google to create a calendar event or something like that. And it's provided all the information that you would pass to Google for that, right?
This is Dave. Would you then add in additional functionality to say whether there was declined or accepted and things like that, just building off it?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine as you start to add more of these tools, the things that it can do, it goes from schedule bot 3000 to personal assistant or HR bot or anything. And you can really take it wherever you want. The declined, in that case, I guess it could depend on if that's a synchronous, if you go to schedule the meeting and you can immediately say, oh, this person's declined it because they're out of office, which shouldn't happen if you checked the availability up here. But if it did, you could actually respond with an error message here, error meeting declined by out of office. Let's say that you have the ability to figure that out in the system. The agent's going to get that message back, and now it's going to do take some type of step on it. So, it appears that Mark Tanaka is out of office and has declined the meeting, and then you could continue from there, right? Maybe you can find another time that is based on that availability, right? So it's a really fluid experience, right? It's asking for availability again. It really should have that, but you know, that's not a big deal.
I just know how many meetings the availability is on the calendar and they don't accept the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think like in that instance, you could have something that runs in the background, and you know, if something doesn't get accepted, you could trigger this bot again to prompt the person and say, hey, I noticed you couldn't join this. Do you have another time you'd like to suggest? Like, you know, we're getting into more complicated setups, but that's the idea, right? Yeah, so that's kind of how it works. And then finally, I have a demo of us. I've connected this up to kind of this console that we use, or that I use. I don't know if anyone else uses it, to explore metadata. And I've connected it with the Salesforce metadata, and I've connected it with the Dreamhouse application, which is like a realty application that has broker and dealers, or a broker and property information. So, you know, like the address, the assessed value, the number of baths. And what I've done over here is I've written a query that's returned, you know, 1,400 properties. So a lot of data returned here. And what we can do, this is the part where I want to show you the code interpreter primarily. What we can do is actually upload that query. So I could come over here and say attach query. And then basically what I'm going to do is turn that query into a CSV, and then we upload it to the agent. And I'll do a little oven swap here. Whenever that finishes, you know, this is basically what I sent up. I said, I want you to I misspelled stuff. I want you to analyze the records, the record data in the CSV. And then I told him what the query is that I ran, although it could figure that out probably. And the assistants come back and it's looked at the data using Python, by the way, not even, because this file that I've uploaded is several megabytes. It's too big for the AI to actually peek into and see. So instead what it's done is it's loaded up a virtual environment. This is all out of the box by OpenAI, by the way. It's created a Python virtual environment like a Jupyter notebook. And it's loaded this file that I've uploaded into it. And then it's, you know, here it's called head on the data to just get the first row of data back. And it's seeing that, okay, these are the properties in it. And now based on that, it's telling me what's in the data. And then, you know, it says like, what do you want to do with it? So here I said, can you create a summary of data grouped by broker? And you can see it's generated this table using Python. So this is 100%, like this is guaranteed to be accurate, at least as the requirements are interpreted. And it's generated all this data by executing Python against the data that I've uploaded. It's still never actually loaded the data in itself. It just knows the shape of the data, and it can run Python to execute against it. And then when we get outputs, you know, it gets some form of that output and then can show, like, basically provide those results back to me. And we could then ask it for a CSV to download, and it will generate a CSV. We can ask it to generate graphs, and it can generate graphs because it's using Python behind the scenes, or Jupyter notebooks. Yeah, and you can do some really interesting inquiries into your data, and it becomes kind of this natural language interface for anything at that point. And in kind of like having your own little data scientist at your fingertips, although, you know, there's obviously limitations, but we're still just in the early days of this.
Yeah. Do you know where that notebook or virtual environment is held, and whether that gets deleted or
For sure. I don't know where it's held. I assume it's running in Azure. Like Alex might actually have a better guess than I do. It's running in a cloud environment somewhere. They're definitely cleaning it up afterwards, and it's definitely like a virtual environment that I assume is like super short-lived. I think even I've noticed, even if I come back to one of these conversations like a week later, that the environment's been cleaned up already, and you can't ask it to continue without it recreating the environment.
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but I would guess it's either Azure Functions or just some container they spin out that they then delete.
Yeah, it does seem like the environment is persist during the conversation, because you'll see that like as you're asking it to do new stuff, it will kind of rely on work that it's already done in the past. Like to generate this graph, for example, it's referencing the broker summary that it created earlier. So there is some type of, I think I envision it to like, if you were typing into a Jupyter notebook, you might have a code block that does this to generate, I imagine they're like each inquiry is kind of getting its own little block in the Jupyter notebook. Yeah, you can see we can maybe download this now. I can download my broker summary, open it up. So yeah, this is super interesting. This agent also just has the ability to run SQL queries against the org that it's connected to, and SOSL queries, so like search the org. So can you give me a count of properties managed by Alan Crawford? You can see, similar to before, it asked, first to search the records, and it tried to search it and it got an error back. And then based on that, it said, oh, I need to list the S objects in the org. So when it did that, it got these custom objects back. And now it can then continue with, oh, I'm going to list the fields, and it gets the fields back. And now I'm going to search the records. Now that I know the metadata, it can do a successful search, or it can not, because it's not available, I guess. But yeah, eventually it gets like, it's running all these function calls based on errors that it's getting back. So it's quite incredible that it, was able to work through the problem. It gets all these errors and it tries something else, gets an error and it tries something else. And it was eventually able to get there, which is, obviously something in my implementation is broken. So yeah. Yeah, that is it. That was a lot, I know. So I appreciate everybody for hanging on. Hopefully that made sense. We've got a minute left.
It was great to get a glimpse in here, right? For people like myself who aren't spending a lot of time looking at this stuff, like just seeing what's happened in the last, say 2 months is pretty incredible, right? Yeah. So thanks for sharing. I really like it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is if you saw the news articles about, OpenAI just killed 1,000 startups, that assistance API is kind of the thing that they were really referencing there, because so many people were building these custom assistants, and, that just makes it so easy to do.
Yeah, that was impressive. I saw them, you mentioned the, build your own GPT feature, but now I see what you mean by how the assistance API is much more powerful and does everything that does, plus and then some, right? I mean,
yeah. In my opinion, the build your own GPT, this is my tinfoil hat take on it. It's a honeypot to collect ideas from people. Like I went through it, and then at the end of it, I was like, this didn't actually do anything. It just was a really good way to ask me for requirements for my application. Like it did a great job of asking me all these questions about what I wanted it to do and how it would work. And then it doesn't actually do anything except for create a system prompt. And then you can like upload documents and stuff. So it is a low code. And I'm sure they'll continue to improve on that and make it way more powerful.
Well, we are at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's calendars, but if there's, if somebody's got a burning question, please throw it out right now, and otherwise we'll start to shut down.
What would be cool to see is there was that Gemini demo that was released yesterday from Google, and you showed the vision stuff. It would be interesting to at some point to talk about like the differences between the two. And I mean, now if you go on Twitter or whatever and search for it, it's a pretty amazing demo showing that some of that vision capability.
Nice. I haven't seen that yet, but I'm super interested to check out what happens. I mean, one of the downsides, like just talking, that was all positive for OpenAI, but one of the downsides of like using that is the vendor lock and the reliance that you have on them versus like the previous way of building it. You could pretty easily switch from an open source model to OpenAI and back, because everything kind of is structured the same, but you're really offloading a lot of the build on OpenAI's kind of way of doing things. And Google won't have a comparable system, or the open source models won't have a comparable system. So yeah. And we haven't really seen pricing for it right now. They're not charging very much. It's super cheap to run, but and it probably will stay cheap, I guess, with their business model.
Right.
Very cool. I just posted a link to the Gemini video to check out. It literally just came out yesterday afternoon.
Nice. I'll have to check that out. I'm excited. A lot to try to keep up on.
Yep, going fast.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you, Charlie. Once again, we appreciate it. It sounded like Peter was maybe saying he was going to do the comparison next month, but I'll talk to him offline and see if that's true. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So, all right, we will see everyone next year. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Bye.